Hello, my name is Arik Korman, and I'm with the League of Education Voters. Welcome to our free online webinar series, Lunchtime LEVinars. We started this series over 3 years ago to share information and build knowledge on important and timely issues. We are pleased to offer these webinars thanks to the generous support of our sponsor, the Boeing Company. Today, we will hear from Washington State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Randy Dorn, and Deputy Superintendent Gil Mendoza on OSPI's roles and responsibilities. Superintendent Dorn will speak for approximately 10 minutes. Deputy Superintendent Mendoza will speak for about 10 minutes, and we'll have about 10 minutes for questions. The focus of today's webinar is on what the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction does, how parents and the community can engage, and the process for implementing the federal Every Student Succeeds Act. A couple of housekeeping items before we begin. You'll notice a chat function on the right side of your screen. This is a place for you to pose questions to us. As always, feel free to send any feedback about the webinar quality to us at info@educationvoters.org. Randy Dorn is a lifelong resident of Washington State. He has been an elementary and middle school teacher, a principal, and a legislator. For 9 years, he was Executive Director of Public Schools Employees of Washington, the second largest educational employees organization in Washington State. In 2008, Randy was elected Superintendent of Public Instruction. In his years as state superintendent, he has replaced the existing state assessment system with a shorter system, argued successfully against cuts to education funding, expanded early learning opportunities for all students, and championed an updated teacher and principal evaluation system. He also established partnerships with major businesses, including Microsoft and Boeing, to help students gain real-world skills they can apply to the job market or the classroom. Superintendent Dorn and his wife Kay live in Eatonville and have 3 grown sons. Welcome, Superintendent Randy Dorn.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate LEV doing this today and all the people that are on the air. So let me talk about SPI, Superintendent of Public Instruction. The main building's located in Olympia. We have 430 employees. Interesting to note, only about 70 of those employees have been teachers. That's always kind of a shock to the main public. We oversee 9 ESDs, Educational Service Districts. They're around the state. They provide support for districts in early learning or curriculum or assessments. And those are kind of like, they're not actually run by OSPI, but they're kind of like territories to the United States. They're not states, but they're more like Guam or the Virgin Islands or Puerto Rico. They kind of govern themselves, but they're still an entity of OSPI. 295 school districts, 2,200 buildings, and we oversee 1.8 million students across the state. And our goal and our vision is every student ready for career, college, and life, preparing kids for life. The mission? To provide funding, resources, tools, data, and technical assistance that enables educators to ensure students to succeed in our public schools, are prepared to access post-secondary training and education, and are equipped to thrive in their careers and their lives. So the major sections, or some people would sometimes call them silos or cylinders of excellence or departments, would be our assessment department. Oversees all state assessment. Now, state assessment is basically that spring assessment that has been known as the Smarter Balance Test. Teaching and learning oversees standards development and training. That would be all the areas, the arts, social studies, science, music, language arts, math. All the different areas of curriculum would be covered, K through 12. Special education has its own department. And in early learning, we have a department, it's 2 people, but some people think that I'm just K-12, but yes, we are K-12, but we also have to have a connection to the early learning because I believe that's a big part of helping kids be ready for education and to be successful. Federal accountability, is basically Title I and our title services for students that are below grade level. College and career readiness is a lot to do with students that are CTE oriented, career and technical education, used to be called vocational education. Secondary and education support is probably about 21 departments, small entities like drug and alcohol prevention, suicide prevention, working with military parents is another entity. So there's a number of very small little entities that get pots of money either from the federal government or from the state legislature. Schools for the 21st century still get funding for innovation schools. And then another big number of employees in the agency is what we call IT, our technology department, which oversees all our data systems, includes CEDARS, which is our student data system, and collects all the data. And I want people to understand that probably when I came here 8 years ago, that the major function of that was the state assessment. But now we have what we call student services. So we collect data on discipline, attendance, Title I performance, a number of areas that we never collected data on before that has a major effect on student performance. So that is actually dramatically increased what we do in our data department. Professional practices, I usually call this our enforcement department of either ethics violations or possibly criminal violations by teachers or administrators. And we have investigators. A lot of those are either from military or police forces that do investigations on teachers. We all would hope that we didn't have to use those, but there's a lot to do with safety of students and appropriateness of behavior of staff. And we have a higher standard for performance of educators than possibly other people in the work world. So part of our job is to try to connect, and part of my job is to basically travel around the state, not only visit school district, but I visit Chamber of Commerce, I visit Kiwanis clubs, and kind of getting the word out is that education is changing. And also informing them about different subjects that happen that, let's say there might be different forms of information that provide information on education. Example might be on the issue of testing. Another example might be on the issue of standards like Common Core. Another issue might be what used to be called No Child Left Behind is now called the Elementary Secondary Education Act, which that's what it was called when Lyndon Johnson passed it in the 60s. So we have to provide outreach. We either do it used to be face-to-face all over the state. That is fairly expensive and time-consuming, and also we didn't really see dramatic attendance in a lot of those meetings. As the meeting we're on today, we're probably touching many more people today than we would in like a face-to-face meeting and inviting people in a community. And that's where these types of meetings have been very, very fruitful, that we get to talk to not just 100 people, but a couple thousand people are on and off the phone in any one sitting. So the outreach has been social media, it's been on the internet, and webinars like this. And we'd like to get more people involved, and then we also communicate with what we would call in Olympia the ABC groups, which is the superintendent's groups, the principals group, the teachers group, PTA, minority commissions of the like. And we try to filter information to them and get their feedback coming back. A lot of times on the internet, but a lot of times written responses to what we're trying to ask people about and give their input. It's not as easy. Parental engagement is a high priority, not only at the school level and the district level, but at the state level. But it's not the easiest thing to accomplish. We're always trying to get better. I was going to talk for 8 minutes. I'm just about to my 8 minutes, but I'll be available for questions afterwards. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Mendoza to talk about our elementary secondary education.
Great, thank you, Superintendent Dorn. If you have a question for either Superintendent Dorn or Dr. Mendoza, just type it in the chat function on the right side of the screen. Prior to his appointment as Deputy Superintendent, Dr. Gil Mendoza was the Assistant Superintendent of Special Programs and Federal Accountability Division at OSPI. Prior to OSPI, he was Superintendent of the Sumner School District from 2007 to 2011. Before that, he spent 13 years in administration with the Tacoma School District, one of Washington State's largest urban districts, where he grew up. He has held a variety of positions in public education at both the pre-K through 12 and college levels as a teacher, coach, counselor, and administrator. He has held numerous elected and appointed leadership positions in state professional organizations, including appointed assignments by 2 different governors to the Council on Vocational Education and the Professional Educator Standards Board. He graduated from Bellarmine Prep in Tacoma, received his Bachelor of Arts degree and teaching credentials in both basic and special education from Gonzaga University, a Master's in Education degree from University of Washington, and his doctorate in educational leadership from Seattle University. Dr. Mendoza served as a commissioned officer and captain in the United States Army, worked in the computer software services industry for once presidential candidate Ross Perot, and also with the Washington State Department of Corrections. Welcome, Deputy Superintendent Gil Mendoza.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. I'm going to pick up on a comment that Randy shared about ESEA that President Johnson signed, which was passed in 1965, the Elementary Secondary Education Act, and was really promoted as the civil rights law for education, which it was. And ESEA remains as the cornerstone of federal support for public education across our nation. It's been reauthorized and redefined under different names over the years. The last one that everybody knew was No Child Left Behind, which is now gone, and we had for 15 years, and has been reintroduced and reauthorized as the Every Student Succeeds Act. So when you hear ESSA, it is ESEA, just redefined. So I want to share with you that under ESSA, the new law, it is a lot like No Child Left Behind in regards to components that we must have, and at its core is really to identify and support poor, struggling students with supplemental funds we receive from the federal government to local states, and then we pass that out to local districts. The big difference between these two laws is No Child Left Behind had a lot of federal oversight and federal intrusion and federal direction, and there were a lot of negative constructs to it. For example, if a school was identified as struggling, they had to send letters home saying our school's failing. They had to send letters home saying your child's teacher is not highly qualified by federal standards. And all of that has been eliminated under the new federal law. We're looking at the positive aspects of our charge in public education. It's really honoring the great work that great teachers do. It is still about accountability, having standards, having an assessment that aligns to those standards, and using those tools in support of students to support them. Money from the federal government flows to us in different streams across multiple what we call entitlement programs. You know, there's like Title 1A, Title 1C, Title 2, Title 3, and the numbers I know don't mean a lot to the audience, but just understand that it flows to us in streams. And under No Child Left Behind, how that was very different from ESSA, we had to spend the money very specifically within the confines of those streams as they flowed to us. And if a child qualified for one or for more than one stream, let's say for 3 streams of money, it was very problematic in how we put that money together to serve that child and make sense out of a whole child concept in a system that was comprehensive. Under the new law, ESSA, the good news is the money still flows to us in streams, because if it flowed to us in a big block grant from the federal perspective, that would mean we can be more efficient, and they would probably reduce funding. So the fact that it flows in streams is still good, so we can target focused areas, but the best part about ESSA is we can consolidate that funding now and spend it in a braided or blended fashion that really focuses on the issues in support of students find out what they are, figure out a strategy to address them, and then bring the money consolidated to support it. So we're more cohesive in our approach to that effort. Because I mentioned, this new law, I think a big difference that's a benefit of ESSA, different from No Child Left Behind, is that ESSA really is about states' rights. I mentioned the federal oversight under NCLB. The new law passed by Congress in the latter part of last year and signed by the President on December 10th really touts the importance of local states' rights. This is about states' rights, not about federal intrusion. And Congress is very intentional in that aspect. Related to that, because the money flows to the state and then we allocate it out to local districts on a formula basis, typically some will be on a competitive basis and a need basis. But we're trying to extend that same concept of states' rights to our local districts. As Randy mentioned, there are 295 districts. Each one is governed by an elected school board who selects a superintendent, and they serve as the leadership of those districts. And with all of their staff, our intention is to provide this supplemental funding so they can be self-governing in how they spend that money in a supplemental fashion to support the students who are identified under this new federal law. So it will require us to have an accountability system that talks about how do we serve those most in need. So very briefly in my next 5 minutes, I think I have about left here, let me talk about the process we've gone through to get ready to enact this new law. It will be fully implemented in the 17-18 school year, but some components deferred to the 18-19 school year. The funding still flows the way it has for the interim year in 16-17, just so you know, but we're already have gotten rid of a lot of the negative constructs of NCLB. We're not employing those at all anymore. So we began our work about in January, actually started last December once the President signed the law. We designed a plan for how do we address this. So we basically have put together about 13 work groups that have been working over that time period, addressing questions that are required for us to address in the law, and addressing questions that were submitted to us by the Department of Education in a template that says the law says you must address these questions. And they're along thematic themes like parent engagement, serving second language learners, looking at how we're going to hold ourselves accountable. So we have an accountability system. And so we looked at thematic concepts from the law. These work groups have answered the questions and said these are the recommendations we're making. And then we have an overarching work group that looks at all recommendations and validate them in the format that they send to the state superintendent. And the law, the congressional law is very clear about saying the SEA, which is the state education agency in our state, that would be our state superintendent elected by the people of Washington State, will be submitting a plan for approval by the Department of Education. We've had membership on these work groups of more than 250 people representing every entity who's an advocate, professional organization, our legislature, the governor's office, the teachers union, private entities have all been represented through the work groups and across to the CPT to bring these recommendations that we're using to draft now a plan that we'll be putting out for public comment sometime in mid-November, so that it'll be online. We'll email it to our EdWa.gov listserv, which is about 30,000 people. Anyone who goes online to our website anytime between now and then and subscribes to our website, which is interactive for having input to the plan, we'll have your email. We will send you a copy of the plan as well, a link to that copy. So we'll have 30 days to receive those comments and ensure that we've addressed what people are putting forward as, did you think about this? And if not, we'll make sure that we address it, we look at it, we incorporate it into the plan if appropriate, or as appropriate, I should say, related to what we're receiving. And then we submit that plan to the Department of Education. We're planning on having our submission in sometime in December, before the end of December, so that we can wait for the Department of Ed to approve it. And they have 120 days to approve our plan from their consideration dates and receiving dates, and then we'll have a plan to go forward with. And our goal is to have that plan understood and approved in time to allow local districts to ramp up to the new requirements that we have, because some of the things that will be new under this plan will be procedures and protocols for how we implement what our design is. So we're pretty excited about it. We're a little tired from all the work. It's been incredibly multifaceted. It's been a lot of long meetings, a lot of deep conversations, but we've really aired a lot of things, keeping our focus on what's best for students in our state for learning. Something unrelated to the plan but related is we have a state law that requires us to align our state and federal accountability systems, and we've been able to do this under this plan better than we ever have in the past. And we're excited about having a single accountability system that's simple, well understood, and with resources to support staff in their learning to that end, and parents and families in understanding it, and us being strong partners in supporting each other, ultimately supporting the children who we serve in our state system. Thank you.
And thank you, Dr. Mendoza. We have about 10 minutes for questions. For those of you who are listening, please type your questions in the chat feature on the right-hand side of your screen. No question is too basic, and what a wonderful opportunity to have both Superintendent Dorn and Deputy Superintendent Mendoza. Our first question is, how can OSPI help close the achievement and opportunity gaps?
Well, go ahead, Gil.
Well, under our plan, when we look at our the metrics, as we call them, for designing an accountability system, one of the components, one of the primary components in looking at that is not just looking at proficiency data of all students, but looking at proficiency data of subgroups. So we disaggregate that data and see how different demographic groups of children are doing along the lines of the benchmarks that we set, so we can compare the gaps between different groups and provide resources and support to those who need it most.
And I'll add, for 7 years, I've asked the question in our Title I programs, who's got the best program, who's moving the needle, whether it's poor kids, minority kids, what is it? And I was never able to actually get specific answers. Next week, we're unveiling that analytic data. And for the people that are knocking it out of the park, I say keep doing what you're doing. The people in the middle, you might want to take a look at the people that are knocking out of the park. And the people that are in the bottom, we're going to take a look at their plans and say, you need to do something different, and we're going to provide resources for them and training of what can be done differently. We never had that kind of data, and I think when we give schools and districts that data, they're going to change their policies. It's a game changer, I believe.
Thank you, Superintendent Dorn and Dr. Mendoza. The next question I have is about data. How can parents access the data that OSPI has collected?
We actually have on our website, we have a link for parents. There's a section, it's newly designed over the last couple of years. We just updated it this year. It's called My Child's Progress. And parents can go onto that website and look at data about their child's school. And they can also look at data specifically about their child and how they're performing along the standards that we've set.
Wonderful. Okay, the next question I have is about the Every Student Succeeds Act. The Department of Ed receive and review date isn't until March. Why is OSPI choosing to submit in December?
I'll take that one because that's pretty much my decision. Okay, so I serve until January 9th, and I wanted all the work to be done and have it to submit so that we can make adjustments after March and the group can do it. But if we don't turn it in now, I don't see how we're going to get it back and to be able to make the adjustment for next school year. Next school year, it's got to be in place for the budgeting for next school year. Now, I'm not so sure the next administration could possibly move that out a date. I think that's what a number of states are doing because a number of states aren't near as far along as us. They're kind of counting on the federal government delaying it a year. I don't know if that's going to happen. So what I wanted to do is do all the work we could possibly do, put it in the best shape, talk to as many people, get the right thing, make it as flexible as possible, and then we would have it to turn into the feds, and the new person that takes my place will be able to take a look at it, and so it's going to be a simple, to me, a simple transition of sharing the responsibility and decision.
And I would add to that, the December timeline was our originally scheduled date, so we didn't like rush anything to accommodate, Randy's request. When the law was first passed, we planned a December date knowing that the department had 120 days to approve the plan. And we targeted it out saying 120 days from December is about March or April, which gives local districts and buildings from March until September to scaffold up their planning and doing it. And so we're on our original timeline. We did backwards planning. We've been pretty diligent about that, and we're pretty confident that we've covered all of our bases, and we're going to submit that. And the dates that the department has provided were draft dates, and Congress has pushed back on those. So they may still be looking at our plan when we submit it. In fact, in conversations with the Department of Education, they've indicated we're going to receive it. It isn't like they're going to send it back and say send it back later to us. So we're pretty confident we've done our due diligence, and we're trying to err on the side of giving districts all the time they need to be prepared to implement.
Wonderful, wonderful. Next question is about the Healthy Kids, Healthy Schools grants. And our questioner wants to know, do you see another round of Healthy Kids, Healthy Schools grants being available this next budget cycle?
Yes, we do. And the original appropriation for that was discontinued. But what the department has done in their appropriations bill is they've taken some of the student support bills that existed, like 21st Century Community Learning Centers, Healthy Schools, and they've kind of bundled it together in a large grant under Title IV now, Title IVA and Title IVB. And so that money will be coming to us as a state, and then we will be submitting grants or competitions for grants to any local district who wants to apply. And something we'll be doing differently under these grants, instead of supplying the money to districts that have great grant writers, we're going to really be more eclectic in our approach and try to hit urban, rural, large, small, east, west, and look at need based upon data that we get from our Healthy Youth Survey that we all participate in already, to make sure that we're putting the money where we think the highest need really is.
Wonderful. The next question is about the 295 districts that we have here in Washington State. The question is, with each district having its own accounting system, is there any way to have a more transparent accounting system for all of the districts to share best practices and so the public can see how resources are allocated statewide?
So basically, 295 districts have the same accounting system to OSPI, and we ask for the same data that they have to report. So their finances come under the same kind of report, and so I understand that people may do things differently. In other words, they expend their dollars differently, but I think our new data system that is easy to work, even I'm learning how to work it, that you can see who's doing better, who's not. And we also have added, just this last session, it is called, well, it used to be called Sizzle, but it's a best practices department. We actually have, we're going to have at least 2 to 3 employees that are going to track and follow best practices in all areas and try to disseminate that to all districts so that districts can see who's performing better and who's moving the needle more than anybody else.
And I would add that under the draft regulations, there are draft regulations that accompany the Congressional Act of Every Student Succeeds Act. And under the draft regulations, there's a requirement that we report on expenditures by federal, state, and local funding streams. And Congress is aware of the fact that we don't even, many states don't even have not collected or shown capacity for how do we even report that, but it is a requirement under the federal, under the draft regs that may survive, so we will tool our systems to even disaggregate that data by funding stream. So it is pretty transparent now, but it will be more.
Well, wonderful. We have time for just one more question. And the question is for both Superintendent Dorn and Deputy Superintendent Mendoza. What is your most rewarding accomplishment during your 8-year tenure as both Superintendent and Deputy Superintendent of Washington Schools?
Actually, I think there would be a handful of them, but I usually answer it a little bit differently, and here it is. In the first 4 years that we were in office, it was a major cutting. We were in the worst economic time possible, and through the work of all the folks working with districts and stuff, I think we're accomplished to hang on to about an extra $1.5 billion for schools in the first 4 years. And we did not take, even though we took pretty significant hits, we did not take the dramatic hits that other states did. And yes, there were sacrifices. There were no salaries given to state employees and public school employees and things of that nature. But I believe we were able to keep basic education alive. It also meant, though, that we increased how much you use local levies, and that's against the McCleary thing. So I would say that's the biggest accomplishment, but there are other positives like, you know, all-day kindergarten and new assessment system and computerizing a lot of schools. So that's what I believe.
Hi, this is Gil Mendoza. I think for me, I've been in the agency 5 years, just about 5 years, and I think the thing that I would be most proud of in my tenure here is we've really tried to, I talked about how funding comes in different siloed streams, is we've really tried to break down the walls and work more cohesively and collaboratively as a staff within the agency itself and how we serve local districts. So if the district would call, depending on who they talk to in the past, they might get 5 answers if they called 5 people. And I think one of the things we've worked better toward is our interdependent work. So depending, no matter who they called, they'd get a common answer. And then I think most importantly is that, you know, we do 3 things as an agency. We allocate a lot of money, we regulate its expenditure, and we facilitate work to that end. And I think in our strong partnership with the educational service districts, we've really done a better job of facilitation, and we want to grow in that area so that we are really focusing on service and less on compliance.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Superintendent Randy Dorn and Deputy Superintendent Gil Mendoza. Our next webinar will take place Thursday, November 17th. The topic is still to be determined. We'll send you an email and put the date on our website as soon as the webinar topic is confirmed. Thanks to each of you for joining us today. If you have additional questions, please send them to me, Arik, spelled A-R-I-K, at educationvoters.org. A recording of today's presentation will be available on our website. Please feel free to share it with your friends and colleagues. Thank you again for attending. We hope that you will join us at future webinars.